In this demo, we want to write a program to find the maximum element in different types of arrays. So I'm gonna start by declaring an integer array and initialize it with a couple of values. The return type of a function that I need to define is integer. So I can just print the output of maximum a like this. Now let's define the function. So the return type is integer and the name of the function is maximum. And we pass arrays by pointer. And inside this function, we need to declare this max variable. And we can initialize it with the first element of the matrix. And then we just need to iterate our elements. And if the value of a at index I is greater than max, we need to update maximum value with a at I. And finally, we just need to return max. And since we cannot get the size of the array out of a pointer to its first element, we need to pass size as an argument to this function. And we need size of a divided by size of a at index 0 here. What if we have an array of double values or characters? We can just overload functions with different types. So I'm gonna copy this part of the code and I'm gonna change this to double, and we need to change the name of the array and just gonna change the numbers as well. We can also copy this function and try to modify it. So we will have double. The size is still integer and we need to change this return value to double, and everything else is the same. Now we need to overload again for characters. So if we have char C, and then we are gonna change these values. Also this A here should be replaced by B. I'm gonna copy this function to overload the character type. So we need char here. And let's just try the code. Now let's try to overload another function that returns the maximum element in the array of strings. So let's start by defining an array of strings. So we can just define a 2D array of characters with 4 elements. Each of them is going to have maximum 10 characters, and we can initialize it with a couple of colors. And let's just copy this over here. Now I'm gonna copy this function to see if this structure could work for an array of strings. So first of all, I'm gonna change this parameter to this structure, and we need to set the second bound. And then we need an array to keep the maximum value. And we are gonna iterate, and let's see if this structure works for comparing C strings. And finally, we need to return an array. So just like passing an argument to a function, when we want to return an argument, we cannot return the entire array, and we can just return a pointer to its first element. So we're just gonna add an asterisk here so that we can return a pointer to the first element of this char array. And I'm just gonna keep this structure as well to see if it works or not. So let's run the program. So let's just follow the compiler error messages to see if we can fix this code using these error messages. The first error is saying that initializer fails to determine size of max. So one way to get the size of the first string is to use str length and use the length of the first element. Let's just try the code to see if this can fix the problem. It couldn't solve the problem because the main problem here is that we cannot copy strings to another string with equality operator. We just need to use a string copy function. So I'm just gonna remove this part of the code, and I will use a string copy to copy the elements of the first element of A to max. Now we also need to replace this assignment here with the same syntax that we use up there, and I'm gonna update this with I. We also miss a semicolon here. Let's see the output of this function at this stage. So the warning that we are getting here is saying that we are trying to return a local variable. And local variables will be discarded after completion of the function. So when we try to return this char array max, it doesn't really exist anymore. So we need to keep this array in memory in some way. The solution is to define this array as an static array. When we define an array as an static array, the lifespan of that array will be the entire program. So we will not lose the results after completion of the function. Now let's try to run the code again. The next problem is that we are declaring this array with a dynamic value, but the compiler expects us to use a constant value. So I'm just gonna replace this with 10. Now that we fixed all the compile error and warning messages, we need to check if the logic of the program is correct. The maximum element of this array is obviously yellow, but we got blue. It means that this compare expression doesn't work. We should use a string compare instead of comparing with this operator. So we are going to replace this expression by a string compare. Now we need to check the output of the string compare. If these two values are equal, we will get 0. If the first element is greater than the second one, we will get positive value. That's what we are looking for, so I'm just gonna use this expression. So we got the right value here. So I'm gonna review key takeaways of this example. The first point is that when we want to return an array, we need to return as a pointer with this syntax. The second point is that we cannot return a local array unless we define it as a static array. The lifetime of static arrays is the entire program. So if we don't define this array as a static array, it will be discarded by completion of the function, and we will not have access to that memory location to print the value here. The third point is that we cannot use equality operator to assign a string to another one with C strings, and we should use a string copy function. And also we cannot use comparison operators to compare two C strings, and we should use a string compare function. Now let's declare an array of strings named E and initialize it with the same array and see how we should modify the function if we have an array of strings instead of C strings. So let's just copy this function. So the return type is a string, and we will have an array of a string here instead of a matrix. And we still need the size because we have array of strings and we don't need the size of the string itself. So we can just declare string max and initialize it with a0. And we can use comparison operators to compare these two values. And also we can use equality to assign values. So we got the same result with much less trouble. But we need to know about C strings because sometimes we need to understand some codes that are in C string. So even if we don't use it, we need to know how it works.